Pam Bondi walked into court ready to argue a fraud case. But instead, the judge attacked her for wearing a tiny gold cross. "Remove it or face contempt," he snapped. The courtroom froze. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped. Even the stenographer stopped typing. Everyone expected her to stay quiet. But Pam didn't just fight back. She exposed a pattern of deep-rooted discrimination that shook the entire legal system to its core. What started as a fine turned into a movement. And by the end, the judge's career was over, and Pam's name was history. Stay till the end, because this isn't just about a necklace. It's about a system finally being called out. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The courtroom was silent until it wasn't. Remove that necklace, counselor, or be held in contempt. Every head turned. The tension snapped like a rubber band. For a moment, even the echo of typing from the court reporter stopped. Attorney Pam Bondi stood behind her desk, legal briefs in hand, prepared to argue a corporate fraud case. Her expression didn't shift, but her gold cross, delicate, no bigger than a thumbnail, gleamed faintly against her blouse. She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, Your Honor." Judge Harold Halpern didn't blink. Perched high behind his bench, his tone was sharp, his gaze cutting. "You heard me. This is a courtroom, not a church. Either remove the necklace, or I'll issue a fine." The opposing counsel leaned back in his chair, blinking in disbelief. Pam looked around the room. Even the jury pool waiting to be dismissed sat up straighter. It wasn't just the command, it was the way he said it. Cold, targeted. The cross hadn't disrupted anything. It wasn't oversized. It wasn't a statement. It was just hers. She met Halpern's stare, calm, professional, but there was iron in her spine. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a personal item of faith. It's not obstructing the proceedings in any way." "This courtroom maintains religious neutrality," Halpern replied. "You're welcome to wear it, outside, not in front of my bench." Pam slowly set her file down. Then, without raising her voice, she turned slightly and addressed the court reporter. "Please mark this exchange for the record." The court reporter nodded. Halpern's voice sharpened. "You're on the verge of contempt, Ms. Bondi." Pam gave a small, composed smile. "Then I guess we'll be litigating 2 cases today." A collective murmur swept through the gallery. The air felt electric. Something had shifted. Halpern sat back, lips tight. For the first time, he seemed slightly unsure. Pam didn't flinch. She wasn't just standing up for herself. Everyone in that courtroom could feel it. She was drawing a line. Opposing counsel cleared his throat awkwardly. "Are we continuing with the fraud hearing?" Pam didn't take her eyes off the judge. "We will. But first, the court needs to decide what it's really prosecuting today, fraud or faith." Halpern's gavel hovered, but didn't drop. Outside the courtroom doors, a journalist adjusted her lens. She'd just captured everything. Judge Halpern smirked like a man who thought he'd won. "Very well," he said, adjusting his robe with a flick of his wrist. "Ms. Bondi, you are hereby fined $200 for violating courtroom decorum. Consider it a reminder that this chamber is neutral ground." The bailiff scribbled it down. The courtroom murmured again, but this time not from surprise, from disbelief. Pam stood still, her gold cross glinting just enough to draw attention, but not enough to be the distraction Halpern claimed it was. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, but under the desk her pen moved fast. The fine wasn't the point. She could have paid it 10 times over without blinking. It was what it stood for. Across the aisle, the opposing counsel raised an eyebrow, fighting a grin. He whispered to his assistant, "She'll probably let it slide." "Most do." Pam slid her notes forward and clicked on the courtroom mic. "Your Honor," she said, tone steady, "for the record, I respectfully note that this fine will not go unchallenged." Halpern leaned forward. "Are you looking to escalate this?" Pam didn't break eye contact. "I'm looking to clarify what kind of courtroom this really is." The tension snapped like a live wire. A junior paralegal in the back instinctively reached for her phone. Reporters near the door exchanged glances. Halpern shifted in his chair, face tightening. He wasn't used to being pushed. Pam slowly sat back down, her hands folding over her notes. On her legal pad, a single phrase was underlined 3 times. "Violation of First Amendment." The rest of the hearing carried on, but the room felt off balance. Every eye flicked back to Pam more than once. Even the jury pool, now exiting, whispered as they walked out. The second the session recessed, Pam rose, gathered her files, and walked briskly through the rear door. Outside in the hallway, she pulled out her phone and dialed. The voice on the other end picked up on the first ring. Pam didn't waste time. "We have a problem," she said. Her tone was sharp now, intentional. "A big one." She turned to glance back at the courtroom door, then walked toward the exit with purpose. On the other end of the line, the voice replied, "Send me the transcript. We're going to need every word." Recess didn't bring silence. It brought whispers. And in a courthouse, whispers travel like wildfire. "She's really pushing it," one clerk murmured. A junior attorney leaned against the water cooler, eyes wide. "I wear my wedding ring in every hearing. No one's ever said a word." "Exactly," said another. "What's neutral about punishing a cross and not a ring?" The gallery buzzed with low murmurs and quiet debates. But not everyone was on Pam's side. Halpern was following decorum, a firm partner said stiffly. "That courtroom is his domain. You challenge that, you challenge order." An older lawyer beside him shook his head slowly. "This isn't about decorum. It's control. And this judge, he's made moves like this before. Quietly. No one wants to be the first to say it out loud." In the hall, Pam sat at a narrow wooden bench, her laptop open on her knees, fingers moving fast. Every word she typed was sharp, deliberate, and constitutional. Motion to suspend fine. Citing First Amendment. Religious expression. Precedent. Tinker versus Des Moines. Burwell ver Hobby Lobby. She didn't just want to push back. She wanted to build a wall of precedent so solid it couldn't be ignored. Inside the courtroom, the energy was different now. People weren't just watching her. They were waiting, seeing if she'd flinch. She wouldn't. She walked back in with the motion in hand, heels echoing like a gavel across tile. Her opposing counsel looked up, smirk fading. This wasn't going away. Pam handed the motion to the court clerk, who paused, glanced at the header, then walked it straight to the bench. Judge Halpern took the folder with a mechanical nod. He opened it. The second his eyes hit the title, "Motion to suspend fine under constitutional grounds," his jaw shifted slightly. A tight tick formed at the edge of his cheek. He kept reading, line by line, every citation, every case. His brow furrowed deeper. For the first time since the confrontation began, he didn't speak immediately. The courtroom noticed. Pam returned to her seat, calm on the outside, but inside, she knew this was the first domino, because if he overstepped here, everything else he'd ever ruled on could come into question. As Halpern finished reading, he looked up, eyes hard, and said, "Ms. Bondi, please approach the bench." Alone, Judge Halpern finished scanning Pam's motion, then leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a chuckle, not a smirk, a full, echoing scoff that bounced off the marble walls and made even the bailiff shift uncomfortably. "You think this is a constitutional matter?" he sneered, shaking his head. "Ms. Bondi, this is about courtroom decorum, not civil rights." Pam didn't blink. She stood with her hands calmly resting on the podium. "With respect, Your Honor." "I know it is." He narrowed his eyes. "Enlighten me." Pam clicked the mic on, her voice clear, her tone even. "In Tinker versus Des Moines, the Supreme Court ruled that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. By extension, I do not shed mine at the courtroom door." She paused, letting it sink in. "And unlike a loud or disruptive display," she continued, tapping the cross at her collar, "this necklace has neither hindered proceedings nor disrespected the court." Halpern's smile faltered. The room went still. Pam wasn't raising her voice, but each word cut sharper than the last. She wasn't rattled. She was surgical. "In fact," she said, turning slightly to address the gallery, "the only disruption occurred after attention was drawn to it by the bench, not by me." Gasps were subtle, but audible. Halpern leaned forward, clearly annoyed. "You're threading a dangerous line, counsel." Pam took a single step forward, then reached into her briefcase without rushing. She pulled out a second folder, this one bound with a blue ribbon. "Then allow me to make things official," she said, her voice as steady as stone. "Here's what I'll be filing with the Bar Association after today's hearing." She held it up just long enough for everyone, including reporters now peeking through the glass, to see the title, "Formal Judicial Conduct Complaint, Honorable Harold Halpern." Halpern's lips parted, but no words came out. He hadn't expected pushback. Not like this. Not from her. Pam handed the motion to the clerk without a single extra glance toward the bench. The courtroom buzzed again, but this time with a different energy. Respect, admiration, awe. Halpern's face, moments ago flushed with smugness, had gone a few shades paler. As the clerk walked the complaint to the file desk, Pam calmly returned to her seat, while a journalist outside the chamber whispered, "This just became national." What started as a courtroom confrontation had now grown legs, and those legs were running fast. Pam's motion wasn't just filed, it was noticed. A local journalist sitting near the back, one who'd only come to cover a routine fraud hearing, suddenly had a different story in her hands. She snapped a photo of Pam's cross, another of the complaint folder, and typed 4 words that would ignite a fire. "This isn't about jewelry." That tweet spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had made its way to newsroom editors, legal blogs, and a growing network of female attorneys who had long whispered about Judge Halpern behind closed doors. Pam was reviewing case notes that evening when her phone rang. "Bondi," she answered, distracted. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. "You just opened a very messy door." Pam sat up. "Who is this?" "I'm a former clerk under Halpern," the voice said. "I've seen what he does, who he targets, especially women who don't shrink." Pam's grip on the phone tightened. "He calls it courtroom consistency," the caller added. "But it's not. He lets male attorneys wear visible symbols, even shout over him, and says nothing. But a woman speaks firm, wears a symbol of faith, suddenly it's contempt. Click. No name. No callback number." Pam stared at the wall for a moment, heart beating slower, but heavier. She knew what she had to do. That night she uploaded a video. Short, calm, direct, no edits, no filters. "I stood my ground in court today, not for a necklace, but for what it represents. If I stay quiet, I become part of the silence that protects people like him." She ended it with a simple line. Bias in a robe is still bias. Within minutes, the video began circulating. By morning, a legal influencer with 2.3 million followers reposted it with one caption. "This is going to explode." Comments poured in. "I've been waiting for someone to call this out. She's not just defending herself. She's defending all of us. Tag every female attorney you know." Pam's inbox lit up with over 50 new messages, testimonies, stories, and one marked, "Urgent. You need to see this." The law moves slow, but the internet moves like fire. Pam's clip wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Within 24 hours, the hashtag number "let her wear it" had exploded across platforms. TikTok edits, Instagram reels, Twitter threads dissecting her courtroom argument, frame by frame. Legal scholars weighed in. Activists reposted it with captions like, "This isn't about a necklace, it's about power." Pam sat at her desk, still in her suit from court, watching her notifications tick up like a slot machine. Every few seconds, another tag, another share, another message from someone who felt seen. A female attorney from New York commented, "I've worn a Star of David pin into court for years. Never once questioned. This is real." An activist group quoted her line, "Bias in a robe is still bias," and turned it into a graphic that spread like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, Pam's phone buzzed again, this time from a major legal podcast. "Can you speak tonight? Live. We're doing an emergency panel." She hesitated, then typed back, "Yes." Across town, however, the air was very different. Judge Halpern hadn't made a public statement. Not a word. But silence in a storm only draws more lightning. Now, local news vans were parked outside the courthouse gates. Cameras rolled as reporters called out questions to any staff entering the building. One bold journalist even knocked on Halpern's office door. No answer. Inside, his clerk sat stiff at her desk, fingers trembling as she answered calls. "No comment." "No, he's not available." "I said, no comment." She hung up and looked toward Halpern's door. Still closed, still locked. Back in the court clerk's office, a red notification suddenly flashed across the internal system. "Incoming, emergency review. Request from State Judicial Oversight. Board subject, Halpern, Hannah Harold. Immediate attention required." The clerk reading it widened her eyes. You're gonna want to see this." Word spread fast. Pam was still reviewing case notes when her assistant rushed in. "You've triggered something big. Judicial Oversight just sent an emergency filing. Halpern's officially on their radar." Pam exhaled, slow but steady. Told you, it was never just about me. Across the hall, Halpern finally opened his office door, just as a certified letter was slid under it, marked, Notice of Pending Investigation. By the time Judge Halpern stepped in front of a microphone, the damage was already done. He stood stiffly behind a podium in a dimly lit conference room, reading from a paper that looked more like a legal defense than a statement. His voice was flat, robotic, and everything about it screamed damage control. In light of recent attention, I'd like to clarify that my actions in Ms. Bondi's courtroom appearance were in accordance. A year with long-standing decorum policy, he said, not meeting the camera once. There was no intent to target or discriminate. Pam watched the clip from her laptop, unimpressed. Seconds later, the internet did what it does best: dig deeper. Within hours, legal watchdog accounts began surfacing old footage. Dozens of archived courtroom videos where male attorneys walked in with visible yarmulkes, patriotic pins, and even one with a rosary bracelet clearly visible. Not once did Halpern call them out. Pam's assistant scrolled through the feed, eyes wide. They've got timestamps too. This isn't going away. Pam nodded and opened a fresh document. Formal judicial ethics complaint. Pattern of selective enforcement. Click. Saved. Filed. Meanwhile, inside Halpern's own chambers, something shifted. His longtime court reporter requested leave. His clerk stopped responding to press inquiries. One of the bailiffs, off duty, tweeted from a burner account. He's been like this for years. We were told to stay quiet. Even the hallway felt different. Where people once nodded out of habit, they now averted their gaze. Halpern noticed, and that was before the second blow landed. Pam was preparing notes for her upcoming podcast appearance when her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. It was short. No emojis, no fanfare. He did this to me last year too. Former prosecutor, name withheld attached, was a grainy clip. Halpern berating a female attorney for inappropriate accessories in court. Her infraction? A small pendant shaped like a dove. Pam clicked play, jaw tightening. Another voice, another woman, another receipt. She picked up her phone and whispered, This isn't just a pattern, it's a record. A minute later, her inbox pinged again, this time with a subject line that read, There are more of us. Ready to speak. What started with a necklace had unraveled into something much darker. By the end of the week, 4 more women had come forward, each with a different courtroom, a different year, but the same story. Judge Halpern had singled them out, silenced them, and in some cases humiliated them in front of clients, colleagues, and juries. Their messages trickled into Pam's inbox with quiet courage. He told me to speak softer because I was startling the jury. He mocked my accent in open court. He made me remove a scarf my mother gave me, said it was too ethnic. He humiliated me in front of my client. I've never forgotten it. Pam sat at her desk, reading every one of them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, not to respond, but to absorb. The air in her office felt heavier now, not from pressure, but purpose. She didn't ask for this. She didn't expect it. But the silence had cracked, and Pam had become the voice that echoed through the break. Legal blogs dubbed her the reluctant catalyst. Her followers doubled overnight. Every interview request began the same way. You've started something, Ms. Bondi. She didn't disagree. That morning, she met privately with a civil rights attorney named Janelle Price, former ACLU, sharp as glass. You have the makings of a class action, Janelle said, or at least coordinated complaints. But if you want this to hold weight, we need credibility. Someone from the inside. Pam nodded, pulling out a binder full of testimonies. We're not short on stories. Janelle scanned the documents, then paused. What we need is a judge. Pam's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Pam Bondi. The voice on the other end was gravelly, slow, but unmistakably authoritative. Ms. Bondi, this is Judge Evelyn Rowe. I served on the same circuit as Halpern for 22 years. Pam's breath caught. I've watched his behavior since his first year. Always brushed off, always excused, but not this time. Pam sat up straighter. Are you saying? I'm saying I'll testify, Judge Rowe interrupted. On the record. Pam's hand shook slightly as she reached for her pen. Judge Rowe continued. And I'm not the only one. Others are ready. We've just been waiting for someone like you. The envelope was hand-delivered, thick, sealed, and marked confidential. Notice of formal inquiry. By noon, every courthouse hallway knew what it meant. Judge Halpern was officially under investigation. The State Judicial Review Board had launched a full-scale inquiry, not a warning, not a quiet memo, a formal probe with subpoena power and oversight. For Halpern, it was a devastating blow. For Pam, it was confirmation. The system had finally turned its gaze on one of its own. Halpern's chambers went on lockdown. His face, once smug and untouchable, was now tight with fury. He paced behind closed doors, slamming drawers, barking at his staff. But the difference now? No one was scared anymore. His clerk submitted a transfer request. His longtime bailiff avoided eye contact in the halls. And as reporters flooded the courthouse steps, Halpern's silence became deafening. This investigation might redefine courtroom freedoms, one news anchor declared during a live segment. What began with a cross necklace could shift how judges enforce personal expression across the country. In her office, Pam prepared not just documents, but herself. This wasn't about one hearing anymore. It was about all of them. The hundreds of women who'd written to her, the quiet glances she now got from courthouse employees, the silent nods of encouragement in parking lots and elevators. Her phone buzzed. Another interview request, then another. She turned them all down. Instead, she sat at her desk, smoothing out the front of her blazer, cross still resting proudly at her collar. Her assistant glanced up from the computer. "You ready?" Pam looked up, eyes calm but unwavering. "It's not about religion," she said. "It's about respect, about what justice looks like when no one's watching." A knock came at the door. It wasn't press. It wasn't her legal team. It was a representative from the Judicial Review Board holding a sealed letter. She opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside was a single sheet. At the top, in bold, "Request for public testimony, Pamela Bondi." She exhaled, slowly, purposefully. The system was no longer just watching. It was listening. Pam folded the letter and whispered, "Then let's give them something to hear." The hallway outside the hearing chamber was a wall of cameras, whispers, and tension. Pam Bondi walked through it slowly, deliberately, every step echoing on polished floors. Her gold cross rested just above her collarbone, unhidden, unapologetic. Reporters jostled for a glimpse. Microphones extended. Security held the press line. Inside, the chamber buzzed with anticipation. The Judicial Review Board sat behind a long table, 5 members in black suits, faces unreadable. Pam reached the witness podium and took her oath. She didn't shake. She didn't flinch. "Please state your name for the record," one board member asked. "Pamela Bondi," she said calmly. "Attorney at law." A pause, then she began. "At a recent fraud hearing, I was fined for wearing this necklace," she said, lightly touching the cross. "It was not disruptive. It was not political. It was simply mine." Her voice was clear, even. No dramatics, just facts. But this is not about jewelry. It's about power. It's about selective enforcement and silence. She turned slightly toward the panel, her tone rising with quiet strength. Since that day, dozens of women, lawyers, clerks, prosecutors, have reached out to share their stories. About Judge Halpern, about how they were policed, shamed, minimized, for being visible. The chamber sat still, silent. I read every story. I carry them with me. And I am here today not just for myself, but for them. She paused, then delivered the line that would echo across headlines by nightfall. Because if the courtroom isn't neutral for everyone, then it's neutral for no one. There it was. Complete silence followed. Then from outside the chamber, a roar. Applause, loud and unfiltered. The press had watched the live feed on monitors in the hallway, and they weren't waiting for permission to react. Pam gave a small nod, then stepped back. The board chair cleared his throat. "Does the respondent's counsel wish to issue a rebuttal?" All eyes turned to the defense table. Halpern's legal team sat motionless. No papers, no whispers, just blank stares and a single shake of the head. "No, Mr. Chairman," one finally said. "We have nothing further." As Pam walked out of the chamber, her phone buzzed. A federal judge had just resigned, and Halpern's name was trending again. The ruling dropped like a hammer. 3 days after Pam's testimony, the Judicial Review Board released their official statement. Judge Harold Halpern was found guilty of ethical misconduct, repeated bias, and abuse of judicial discretion. Effective immediately, he was suspended from the bench, his chambers sealed, his name scrubbed from the courthouse directory. But that wasn't all. The board added a recommendation to the governor's office: permanent removal from judicial service. The shockwaves hit fast. Legal circles buzzed with the fallout. News anchors broke in mid-segment to announce the ruling. Civil rights attorneys called it a defining moment for courtroom accountability. And behind the scenes, the Bar Association launched a formal review of every case Halpern had presided over in the last decade. Every judgment, every conviction, every moment of silence imposed by fear. Pam sat at her desk, cross still shining just beneath her collar, reading the decision line by line. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just nodded. Took long enough. Across the city, Halpern remained unseen. No statement, no apology, just a quiet resignation from the man who once barked orders from the bench. But Pam wasn't done. She had one more matter to resolve. The original corporate fraud case, the hearing where all this began, was finally called to conclusion. Pam entered the courtroom, not with a firestorm behind her, but with quiet strength. No cameras, no press, just her client, the opposing counsel, and a new judge, one who didn't flinch at her necklace. Closing arguments were short. Evidence spoke for itself. The jury didn't even take an hour. We find in favor of the plaintiff, unanimously. Pam's client exhaled in relief, gripping her hand. You did it. Pam shook her head gently. We did. She turned, walking down the aisle, heels clicking softly as sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of justice. Finally clean. The courtroom that once tried to silence her now echoed with quiet vindication. As Pam stepped into the hallway, a young woman approached, briefcase in hand, eyes full of admiration. Ms. Bondi, do you mentor? The courtroom looked the same, but the energy inside it, completely different. It had been 5 months since Pam Bondi stood in front of the Judicial Review Board, gold cross shining proudly against her blouse. 5 months since the name Halpern vanished from the bench, and justice echoed in places where silence once ruled. Now, as she pushed open the tall oak doors again, the sound of heels on polished tile marked her return. Not as a defendant of principle, but as a defender of change. Pam walked confidently to the defense table, her necklace still visible, still unbothered. This time there were no stares, no whispers, just nods of quiet respect. The new judge, a woman of color, looked up briefly from the docket and smiled. Good morning, Ms. Bondi. Pam nodded back. Good morning, Your Honor. Outside the courtroom, the landscape had changed. Pam's testimony had become a viral case study in law schools. Her story was cited in civil rights courses. State legislation was passed, enforcing stricter protections against biased judicial enforcement. Training programs were updated, guidelines rewritten, and just beyond the courthouse entrance, a massive mural had been unveiled. It featured Pam mid-speech, confident, cross-visible, alongside her quote in bold lettering, "Respect isn't given by the robe, it's earned by how you use it." Tourists stopped to take photos. Law students took selfies. Reporters called it a monument to legal courage. After her case wrapped, Pam stepped outside, pulling her bag over her shoulder as the fall wind tugged gently at her coat. A group of students was waiting nearby, but one girl stepped forward, visibly nervous, clutching a casebook to her chest. "Miss Bondi?" she asked, voice shaking. "Sorry to bother you." Pam smiled. "You're not bothering me." The girl hesitated. I almost dropped out this semester. I was so tired. Tired of the double standards. Tired of being overlooked. Then I saw your clip online, and it changed everything." Pam's smile softened. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," she said. "First year, hoping to specialize in civil liberties." "Well, Jasmine," Pam said, adjusting the chain around her neck, "if you're not shaking the system a little, you're probably standing still." The girl let out a nervous laugh. Pam leaned in and whispered, "Good. Now go give them hell." As Jasmine walked away, the camera lingered on the gold cross, still shining, still standing. The symbol they tried to silence was now impossible to ignore.